The Velari Compact was on the edge of despair. A coalition of thousands of alien worlds spread across the galaxy. They were once strong and proud, but over the centuries, their civilizations had begun to crumble. Their trade routes failed, their communication systems broke down, and their energy networks, the very veins that kept their stars and planets alive, were collapsing. Entire worlds were left dark, silent, abandoned. For the Velari, hope had become a fragile thing. They had sent countless messages to nearby advanced civilizations, asking for help, offering trade, alliances, or even control over their technologies. But every message was ignored. Some powers had no interest. Some thought the compact was already doomed. Some, more cruelly, thought it would be entertaining to watch them fail. Now there was only one choice left: send a desperate final call into the vastness of space, hoping, praying that someone, anyone, would hear. The message was simple, almost too simple. Velari Compact requests immediate assistance. Our worlds are failing. Without help, billions will die. We beg for aid. It was broadcast on every frequency, every wavelength, every transmission method the compact had left. But as they sent it, the leaders knew the odds were low. Even they had grown cynical over the years. On Earth, the signal was received by chance. Deep space listening stations, the pride of humanity's space program, detected a faint but persistent message. For weeks it repeated, a steady, pleading broadcast, incomprehensible at first but clearly intelligent. Dr. Amina Rahman, head of the Earth Interstellar Listening Division, was the first to understand it. She had spent years studying patterns in the universe, searching for signals from other intelligent life. When she finally decoded the Velari transmission, she sat in stunned silence. There, asking for help, she whispered to herself. Her colleagues gathered around, faces pale with disbelief. They had all expected a message from aliens to be cautious, perhaps even hostile. But this was different. It's a request for aid, one young engineer said. Not money, not resources, just help. They're scared. Amina nodded slowly. And no one else is helping them, that's why they sent this. The news reached the halls of power on Earth quickly. Leaders debated. Could humanity really send ships to help an alien civilization? There were costs to consider: money, technology, manpower. And for what? There was no trade, no political advantage, no guarantee the Velari would even welcome them. Yet, something deep inside the human spirit stirred. A memory of their own history, how humans had faced impossible odds, how their ancestors had survived disasters, wars, and famines, often without anyone else to help. Humanity remembered what it was like to be alone in a universe that seemed indifferent. And so, quietly, Earth's leaders made a decision, not for profit, not for power, but because it was the right thing to do. Within weeks, the first human ships began preparations. They were not warships, not weapons carriers. These were vessels built for construction, healing, and support. Engineers, doctors, agricultural specialists, and logisticians boarded the ships, ready to face the unknown. Meanwhile, the Velari watched from their observation stations. When the first ships entered their space, there was confusion. Only a few ships. They had expected maybe one or two, a token gesture from a distant species. They had certainly never expected an entire fleet. The humans arrived with calm efficiency. Their ships glided into orbit over dying planets, deploying repair drones, medical facilities, and energy stabilizers. The Velari had never seen anything like it. The humans did not demand anything in return. They did not take control of the Velari's systems or resources. They simply began helping. Ambassador Kale, one of the Velari leaders, could barely believe what he was seeing. Why would they do this? He asked his council. No species has ever helped another like this, never without asking for control, for tribute, for something. One of his aides shook her head. I do not know, sir, but it seems they value life, all life, even ours, Kale frowned. It is unsettling and yet necessary. The humans worked tirelessly. They stabilized the failing satellites and power grids, repaired the crumbling orbital stations, and restored communications between the Velari worlds. They brought food production units to planets where crops had failed. They taught Velari engineers new methods for energy conservation, star stabilization, and interstellar transport. Everywhere, the Velari watched in amazement. The humans did not boast. They did not make demands. They simply solved problems, fixed what was broken, and encouraged the Velari to rebuild themselves. Over time, the Velari began to speak of the humans in whispers among themselves. The helpers, they called them, the species that acts without asking for reward. Even the most skeptical Velari began to feel something they had not felt in decades: hope. But for the humans, the work was only beginning. They had sent just a portion of their fleet. Far more ships were still on the way, carrying supplies, equipment, and experts for every imaginable field of support. As the Velari watched the distant stars, they noticed the sensors lighting up with new blips, ships arriving in groups far larger than they had expected. Their initial relief was replaced with a mixture of awe and disbelief. One of the Velari engineers turned to Kale. "There are more coming, not just a few, hundreds, thousands, entire fleets." How, why? Kale could not answer. Even he did not understand. Humanity was a mystery, a force moving through the galaxy without the usual motives of greed, ambition, or conquest. And yet, their effect was undeniable. Planets that had been abandoned for decades were suddenly glowing with life. Communications that had been silent for years hummed with activity once again. Kale sighed, realizing the truth. They do not come for gain. They come for something higher, something we have long forgotten. As the first part of humanity's aid unfolded, the Velari began to understand a lesson they had not anticipated. Sometimes, the greatest strength was not in weapons, fleets, or technology. Sometimes, it was in compassion, dedication, and the courage to act when no one else would. The Velari had asked for help, expecting perhaps a token gesture. What they had received instead was a glimpse of something extraordinary. And the story of humanity's arrival was only just beginning. Weeks passed since the first human ships entered Velari space. By now, the Velari had adjusted to the idea that help had arrived, but not the kind of help they had expected. Their skies were filled with the gentle hum of human vessels, carrying machines that repaired, built, and healed rather than weapons designed to fight. The Velari had seen fleets before, but fleets like this were unknown. They glided across the stars with purpose, each ship carrying specialists, engineers, medics, agricultural experts, and scientists. The ships were not enormous or threatening in appearance, but their numbers and efficiency were startling. Ambassador Kale stood on the bridge of the Velari capital station, staring at the monitors. The human fleet had begun distributing repair drones to failing orbital stations. These drones floated silently, repairing metal structures, reconnecting power lines, and even recalibrating long-abandoned communications satellites. "It's extraordinary," Kale said. "They do not fight. They do not demand anything. They simply fix." His aide, Lyra, nodded. "It is almost unsettling. How can a species act like this? There must be a reason. There must be something they want in return." Kale shook his head slowly. "No, they do this because they choose to. That is what is so strange." Meanwhile, on one of the human repair cruisers, Captain Elias Chen supervised the operation. Humans moved with calm determination. Their drones floated across the void, guided by precise commands. Engineers floated in zero gravity, replacing broken components, repairing sensors, and recalibrating energy grids. Drone Unit 386 begins secondary repairs on the Western Orbital Hub, Elias ordered. "We need the communication satellites online before nightfall." A young engineer, Mara Patel, smiled as she worked. "It's amazing. They abandoned these stations years ago. Now with a few adjustments, they're almost like new. Elias nodded. That's the point. We don't just repair, we make things better. We leave them stronger than we found them. Back on the Velari stations, curiosity began to grow. Civilians, once cautious of the humans, started watching them closely. Children stared in awe as human vessels moved with precision, repairing structures that Velari engineers had long given up on. Markets, once empty and lifeless, started receiving shipments of human food supplies and agricultural tools. Crops that had failed for years began to show signs of life again. Is this what humanity does? A young Velari scholar whispered to his mentor. They fix, they help, they teach. Yes, the mentor replied. And we do not understand it. They do not act like other species. As the humans worked, they also trained the Velari. They taught engineers how to stabilize power grids with less energy, how to distribute food across planets efficiently, and how to repair communication networks using recycled materials. Even medical specialists showed Velari doctors new ways to care for their people, without expensive tools or advanced technology. One Velari nurse, Sira, watched a human physician demonstrate a portable health scanner. It is incredible, she said. It fits in a hand, yet it can detect everything. We've never seen anything like it. The human replied with a calm smile. We build what we need. Sometimes the simplest solution works best. The Velari had heard of human ingenuity, of course, from old reports in galactic databases. But seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. Their doubts began to fade. Maybe humanity was different from every other species in the galaxy. Even the political leaders of the Compact could not ignore the effect of the human presence. With the humans' help, failing communication lines were restored. Trade routes, long abandoned, were reopened. Even the distant stars, once on the verge of collapse, began to stabilize with human technology and guidance. Kale met with his council, showing them the progress. Look at our worlds, he said. Where there was darkness, there is now light. Where there was silence, there is now communication. Humanity has changed our fate in just weeks. One council member, a stern diplomat named Vora, shook her head. It is almost unsettling. How do they gain from this? They could easily take control, demand allegiance, or use us for their benefit. And yet, she paused, searching for words. They do none of it. Because, Kale said quietly, they value life. Not profit, not power, not control. They value life itself. Word spread quickly among the Velari. Civilians, once wary of the humans, now called them the Fixers, or the Helpers. Stories circulated of humans who repaired entire towns in days, of drones that restored energy networks on planets that had been abandoned for decades. Parents told their children about the humans' kindness and efficiency. Even the Velari scientists, usually proud and skeptical, began to ask questions. How could a species expand across the stars without conquest? How could they act without self-interest? Was this truly possible? Captain Elias and his crew continued their work without pause. For them, the mission was simple: help where it was needed. Their ships deployed more drones, more supplies, more knowledge. They had already begun mapping out other failing Velari systems, preparing for larger-scale repairs. And then came the first surprise. More human ships were arriving. Not just a few, as the Velari had assumed, but entire fleets. Dozens of new vessels appeared on the scanners, each one carrying more specialists, more supplies, and more equipment. Kale stared at the display, unable to hide his astonishment. They are sending more?" he asked. "Yes," Lyra replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than we could have imagined. Not a few ships, hundreds, possibly thousands." The Velari were silent for a moment, absorbing the sight. Entire fleets of humans were on the way, and they were not warships. They carried nothing but tools, knowledge, and the will to help. A sense of awe filled the council chamber. Kale felt something he had not felt in decades: hope, pure and unshakable. Humanity, it seemed, was not just helping them. It was redefining what it meant to be strong. Strength was not in weapons, he realized. It was in building, in healing, in lifting others up when they were down. The first human ships continued their work, stabilizing planets, restoring energy networks, and training Velari engineers. The aliens learned quickly, guided by patient teachers who never demanded praise. The humans worked in silence, letting results speak louder than words. By the end of the part, Velari society had already begun to change. Where once there had been despair, there was now action. Where once there had been doubt, there was belief. The humans' arrival was more than assistance. It was a lesson, a new way of seeing the universe. And as the sensors continued to detect new human fleets moving closer, the Velari could not help but ask themselves a question that had never occurred before. Why do they care so much? Why would an entire species come just to help? No one had an answer. And perhaps Kale thought quietly that was the point, because humanity did not help for recognition. Humanity did not help for reward. Humanity helped because it was the right thing to do. And that was something the Velari had almost forgotten how to believe in. The Velari had been awed by the first human ships, but nothing could have prepared them for what came next. On the monitors of the Velari capital station, blips continued to multiply. Hundreds of ships entered Velari space, gliding across the stars in perfect formation. Then thousands more appeared, and still more kept coming. The Velari had never seen numbers like this. Entire fleets arrived, yet they carried no weapons, no shields of war, only tools, drones, supplies, and personnel ready to help. Ambassador Kale stood at the edge of the observation deck, his antennae trembling slightly in disbelief. It cannot be possible, he murmured. They are sending an entire armada and not a single one is built for battle. Lyra, his aide, shook her head. They are different, sir. They do not fight, they fix. They heal, they teach. Indeed, the humans' fleets were organized not for conflict but for support. Some ships carried massive repair drones, capable of restoring entire cities in days. Others carried medical bays, designed to treat thousands of Velari patients at once. There were agricultural ships, producing food faster than any planet could consume, and educational vessels, where humans taught Velari engineers, scientists, and children alike. Captain Elias Chen of the human fleet coordinated the operation with calm efficiency. Deploy the repair drones to the outer colonies first, he instructed. Then send medical units to the central planets. Agriculture ships can follow, but make sure every community gets at least a basic supply of food and water first. His crew moved without hesitation. Humans had a unique way of working together, each person knowing exactly where they were needed. The Velari watched, fascinated, as the humans coordinated without conflict, without arguing, without ego. On the planet Velsara, one of the most damaged worlds in the compact, the human drones landed first. They hovered over ruined cities, repairing buildings, restoring energy grids, and cleaning the air. Human engineers worked alongside Velari citizens, teaching them techniques to keep the systems running long after the humans had gone. A young Velari boy, Terran, watched as a human engineer floated by, repairing a power relay. "Why are they helping us?" he asked his mother. She smiled gently, brushing his dark hair. "Because they can, because they care. That is how humans are. They help when others would do nothing." Elsewhere, human medical ships landed on planets that had seen epidemics and starvation. Velari doctors had given up hope in some regions, but humans showed them simple, practical ways to care for the sick. They shared knowledge that did not require advanced tools, knowledge that worked anywhere, anytime. "I cannot believe it," Sira, a Velari nurse, whispered. "They can heal without asking for payment. They can teach without asking for praise. I have never seen anything like this." On the capital station, Kale convened the council. The room was silent as the monitors displayed the full scale of the human fleet. Thousands of ships, each carrying specialized teams, each prepared to help Velari civilization rise from the brink of collapse. Vora, the diplomat, could not hide her astonishment. They are not here for power. They are not here for profit. They are here for us. Kale nodded slowly. It appears so. They value life itself. They do not measure success by domination or control. They measure it by how much good they can do. The Velari began to realize that the humans were not merely assisting. They were redefining what it meant to be a strong civilization. The Compact had long believed that power was measured in fleets and weapons, in political dominance and economic influence. But here was a species that wielded strength differently, through kindness, intelligence, and tireless effort. Captain Chen received a report from one of his forward scouts. Outer colonies stabilized, medical units deployed, agriculture production at full capacity. All systems operational. Next priority, communication networks for the inner planets. He nodded. Good. Begin training Velari engineers on star stabilization methods while the drones continue repairs. Make sure every system we touch can operate independently. The Velari were quick learners. Under human guidance, they began to repair their own ships, power plants, and medical facilities. Children learned to operate simple drones. Engineers understood concepts of energy efficiency they had never imagined. The humans taught them not just to fix what was broken, but to improve it. On the planet Neros, a previously abandoned colony, humans and Velari worked side by side to restore the water supply. Human engineers had brought advanced filtration systems, but instead of just installing them, they taught the Velari how to build similar systems with local materials. "This is incredible," said a Velari engineer named Jala. "We can maintain it ourselves. We don't need them here all the time, and yet they keep coming." Captain Chen smiled as he watched the progress reports. "That's the idea. Help should last longer than our presence. And yes, we keep coming until every world in need has a chance to thrive." News of humanity's efforts spread quickly throughout the Velari Compact. Leaders, once skeptical, began praising the humans openly. Citizens called them the Armadas of Mercy, and the name stuck. Stories of human ingenuity, patience, and compassion filled Velari households. Even rival species who had observed the Velari for centuries took notice. Reports arrived in nearby star systems describing the human fleets arriving not to conquer, but to assist. A distant civilization, the Trellen, discussed the phenomenon in their own councils. "They do not seek power," one Trellen leader said. "They do not ask for tribute or allegiance, yet their effect is undeniable. Look at the Velari. Their civilization is thriving again." "It is unsettling," another replied. "Perhaps we have underestimated them." Back in Velari space, Kale reflected on the humans' arrival. For centuries, the Compact had believed that strength meant domination. Power meant fleets, weapons, and control. But humanity had shown them a different kind of strength, a quiet, persistent, unstoppable power of helping, building, and believing in others. "Perhaps we have been wrong," Kale admitted aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "Perhaps strength is not taken but given." As the days turned into weeks, the human fleets continued their work. Each planet in the Compact received attention. Dying star systems were stabilized with advanced energy techniques. Trade routes were reopened. Cities were rebuilt. Education and healthcare were restored. And through it all, the humans never demanded anything in return. The Velari began to understand that this was not mere assistance, it was a philosophy. Humanity did not act out of fear, greed, or desire for control. Humanity acted out of principle, care, and vision for the future, and the scale of the effort was astonishing. More human fleets were still arriving, bringing specialists for every conceivable field. Environmental engineers, communication experts, logistics coordinators, even cultural educators to help Velari citizens understand and apply new knowledge. The compact civilization, once fading, was now rising faster than anyone could have imagined. One day, Kale gathered his council for a moment of reflection. "We asked for help," he said, "and what we received is more than we could have imagined. Entire fleets, entire teams, entire knowledge banks. They have come not for power, not for recognition, but to see us thrive. And in doing so, they have taught us something far greater than any technology or weapon." Vora nodded, tears in her eyes. "They have shown us what it truly means to be strong. That strength lies not in what you take, but in what you give." Outside the council chamber, children ran among human medical drones, laughing and learning. Engineers worked side by side, repairing and improving systems. Farmers and scientists shared knowledge across species, creating solutions that had never existed before. The Velari realized that humanity's presence was more than a rescue. It was a revolution in thinking, a new standard for life in the galaxy. And yet, even as the Velari marveled at the scale of human effort, one question remained. How far would humanity go? How many more fleets were still coming? The answer was simple: as many as needed. Humanity did not stop until no one in need remained without help. And for the Velari, that realization was nothing short of miraculous, because they had asked for help, and they had not expected that an entire armada, an armada of mercy, wisdom, and hope, would answer. Years passed since humanity first answered the Velari's desperate call. What had started as a small fleet had grown into an entire armada, spreading across Velari space like a wave of hope. Every planet, every station, every community had been touched by human effort. Where there had been despair, there was now life. Where there had been silence, there was now activity. And most importantly, the Velari people had regained something they had almost forgotten: faith in the future. Ambassador Kale stood on the observation deck of the Velari capital station, overlooking the bustling activity below. Cities that had once been abandoned now thrived. Trade routes hummed with activity. Hospitals, schools, and factories operated at levels never seen before. The Velari had not just survived, they had flourished. He turned to Lyra, who had been his aide for decades. "Do you see it?" he asked quietly. "Do you understand what they have done for us?" Lyra nodded, her eyes wide with amazement. "They didn't just repair our worlds. They changed how we see ourselves. They've given us knowledge, hope, and the will to rebuild better than before." The Velari leadership had learned from the humans in ways far beyond technology. Diplomats had learned negotiation and collaboration methods that did not rely on intimidation. Educators had adopted teaching methods that emphasized curiosity, creativity, and practical skills. Even ordinary citizens now worked together, sharing resources and helping one another, inspired by the humans' example. Captain Elias Chen stood on one of the larger human ships, now acting as a central coordination vessel. He reviewed reports from fleets across the compact. Every planet had seen measurable improvements. Entire energy grids had been stabilized. Star systems previously thought doomed now thrived. Schools and hospitals operated at full capacity. Trade networks that had been dead for decades were alive again. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mara Patel, looked over his shoulder. "It's incredible, Captain. We expected improvements, but the scale, it's beyond anything we imagined." Elias nodded. "That's humanity. We don't just aim to fix problems. We aim to leave things better than we found them. And the Velari have shown themselves to be quick learners. This success is theirs as much as ours." Indeed, much of the credit belonged to the Velari themselves. Humans had provided tools, knowledge, and guidance, but it was the Velari who implemented the changes, maintained the systems, and carried the improvements into the future. Humans never interfered beyond offering support. Their presence was empowering, not controlling. One afternoon, on the planet Rylura, a large festival was held to celebrate the restoration of the planet's star stabilization system. Velari citizens gathered in the cities, waving flags and cheering as humans joined in the celebration. Children ran alongside human engineers, laughing and asking questions. It was a moment of pure joy, a symbol of a future rebuilt with cooperation and trust. Taran, the young Velari boy who had once asked why humans helped them, now stood proudly beside his parents. "I understand now," he said. "They do not help because they are told to, they help because it is right, and they expect nothing in return." Sierra, the Velari nurse, smiled as she watched human medics teach local doctors new techniques. "They have changed our lives," she said softly, "and not just through technology, they have changed our hearts and minds." Even the distant powers of the galaxy began to notice the transformation. Reports of Velari recovery, efficiency, and collaboration reached species that had once ignored their pleas. The Trellan, who had observed humanity's work from afar, were among the first to discuss it openly. "They do not conquer," one Trellan leader said. "They do not demand tribute, yet their influence spreads. The Velari thrive because of them, and now others may follow." "It is a new kind of power," another replied. "The kind that inspires rather than intimidates. The kind that changes civilizations by choice, not by force." Back in Velari space, Kale reflected on what had happened. Humanity had answered a call for help with an entire armada, but they had not simply arrived. They had taught the Velari a new way to exist in the galaxy. "They have set a standard," he said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "A standard that all civilizations can measure themselves against, and we are lucky to have been the first to see it." The humans did not stop after Velari space had stabilized. Fleet coordinators like Captain Chen began identifying other species and regions in need. Messages were sent to distant, struggling civilizations. Word of humanity's actions spread across star systems like a beacon. When other civilizations faced natural disasters, resource shortages, or technological failures, they hesitated only briefly before sending signals to Earth, knowing that humanity answered every call. Meanwhile, Velari scholars and leaders began to share the lessons they had learned. Conferences were held, knowledge was exchanged, and partnerships formed not just with humans but with other species inspired by the Velari example. Cooperation, rather than competition, became a model for galactic civilization. Kale looked out at a bustling spaceport, filled with ships both Velari and human. "We asked for help," he said softly, "and we received more than we could have imagined. But the greatest gift is not the fleets, not the technology, not the repairs. It is hope, and the knowledge that a species exists that truly cares for others." Lyra nodded. "They did not just save our worlds, they showed us a path forward, a better way to live in the galaxy." Captain Chen, back on his ship, reflected on the mission. Humanity had done what it always had. Act not out of fear, not out of greed, not out of desire for power. Humanity had acted because it was the right thing to do. And the results were greater than anyone could have predicted. By now, the Velari had become a thriving civilization once more. Their people were healthy, educated, and prosperous. Their world shone brightly, their trade networks flourished, and their culture expanded in ways never seen before. And yet, they never forgot the lesson humanity had brought them. That true strength comes from helping, building, and lifting others, not from dominance or fear. Stories of humanity's deeds became legend throughout the Velari Compact. Children grew up hearing about the fleets that had arrived in their darkest hour, about the engineers, doctors, teachers, and leaders who worked tirelessly without asking for anything in return. Humanity became a symbol of hope, compassion, and possibility. Kale often wondered if other species could ever match humanity's example. Perhaps some would. Perhaps some would try. But one thing was certain: the galaxy had witnessed something extraordinary. And as distant civilizations began to send their own pleas, hesitating only briefly before trusting Earth to answer, It became clear that humanity's influence would continue to spread. Not through fear, not through weapons, not through domination, but through the unshakable belief in helping others. The final scene shows Kale standing on the observation deck as a new signal is received from a distant star system. Velari engineers hover beside him, humans nearby coordinating the fleet. Kale smiled softly. "They asked for help," he said quietly, "and now they will see humanity always answers." The stars beyond shimmered with the promise of cooperation, hope, and a new standard for all civilizations. Humanity had arrived once. Humanity had answered once, and the galaxy would never be the same again.